The wind carried dust like whispers across the dry plains of Red Hollow, a place where grudges lived longer than men, and justice was something people only spoke about after dark. On that burning afternoon, every eye in the small town square turned toward a single woman standing alone in front of the courthouse steps. Her dress was simple, her face calm, but her voice, when it broke the silence, cut through the heat like a blade. "Prepare 3 coffins," she said, her words steady, almost cold. A murmur spread instantly, like fire racing through dry grass. No one laughed, no one dared. Because in Red Hollow, a statement like that didn't come from madness, it came from certainty. Across the square, leaning against a weathered post, stood Caleb Rourke, the most feared rancher in the region. He didn't speak, didn't move, but his narrowed eyes stayed locked on the woman, as if measuring her worth, her courage, or her mistake. Caleb Rourke was not a man to challenge. His land stretched farther than most could ride in a day, and his word carried more weight than any law written in the courthouse behind them. People disappeared in Red Hollow, not often, but enough. And everyone knew whose shadow they vanished under. The woman, however, didn't look afraid. That was what unsettled people the most. She stood as if she had already seen what was coming and accepted it. Sheriff Dalton shifted uneasily near the courthouse door, wiping sweat from his brow, unsure whether to intervene or pretend this moment never happened. "You might want to take that back," someone muttered from the crowd, but she didn't even turn. Her eyes remained fixed on Caleb. 3 coffins, she repeated quietly this time, and somehow that was worse. Caleb finally pushed himself off the post, boots scraping against the dirt as he stepped forward slowly. The entire square seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice was low, dangerous, like thunder rolling in from far away. "You don't look like a woman who understands what she's saying." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were nothing more than a puzzle she had already solved. "And you don't look like a man who's been told no before," she replied. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. No one spoke to Caleb like that. Not, and lived long enough to regret it. But before anything more could be said, she turned and walked away, leaving behind silence so heavy it felt like the sky itself was pressing down. And in that silence, something shifted. Something dangerous had begun. By nightfall, Red Hollow had changed. Doors were shut tighter, lanterns burned lower, and conversations dropped to whispers whenever boots approached. The woman's name spread quickly. Ilara Vance, a stranger who had arrived only 2 days ago, asking questions no one wanted to answer. But now, after her warning, those questions carried weight. Caleb Rourke sat inside his sprawling ranch house, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His men stood nearby, restless, waiting for orders. "Find out who she is," he finally said, his tone calm but edged with something darker. "And why she thinks she can walk into my land and start digging graves." Outside, the wind howled against the wooden walls, as if echoing the unease that had settled deep into the bones of the region. Ilara, meanwhile, sat alone in the small boarding room she had rented near the edge of town. A single candle flickered beside her, casting shadows that danced across the walls. In front of her lay 3 folded papers, names written in careful ink. Caleb Rourke, Marcus Hale, Jonah Pike. 3 men, 3 coffins. Her fingers brushed over the names, not with anger, but with something colder. Purpose. She closed her eyes briefly, memories pressing in, faces, screams, a fire that had taken more than it should have. When she opened them again, there was no hesitation left. Whatever storm she had brought with her, it was already too late to stop it. The next morning, the tension snapped. One of Caleb's men found Marcus Hale dead just outside the town limits, a single clean wound and no sign of struggle. Panic spread faster than truth. By noon, whispers had turned into accusations. "She said 3 coffins," people muttered. "That's one." Sheriff Dalton rode out to inspect the body, but even he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. This wasn't just murder. This was a message. And back in the square where it all began, the air felt heavier than before, like something unseen was counting down. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, though the sky remained clear. Caleb Rourke didn't believe in fear, but he believed in control. And right now, control was slipping. He rode into town alone, his presence enough to silence even the loudest whispers. He found Alara standing exactly where she had been the day before, as if she had been waiting. "1 coffin," he said, his voice tight. "You think this proves something?" Alara didn't flinch. "No," she replied calmly. "It proves I wasn't lying." For the first time, something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Not fear, but recognition. He had seen this before. The look of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to protect. "You think killing them changes anything?" Caleb asked, stepping closer. "It doesn't bring back the dead." Alara's gaze hardened slightly, the calm surface cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. "No," she said quietly, "but it balances the scales." The crowd that had gathered stayed frozen, caught between terror and curiosity. "You remember the Vance family?" she continued. Caleb's expression didn't change, but that was answer enough. "You burned them out," she said. Said it was business. Said no one would care. Her voice trembled now, but not with weakness, with fury held too long. "I cared." Before anyone could react, a gunshot rang out, but it didn't come from Alara. One of Caleb's own men collapsed, a second coffin claimed in an instant. Chaos erupted, shouts, footsteps, confusion. Caleb turned sharply, trying to regain control, but the order he once held over Red Hollow was cracking apart. Alara stepped back, her voice cutting through the noise one last time. "The 3rd coffin," she said, her eyes locked on Caleb, "is yours." Whether it was a threat, a promise, or something already set in motion, no one could tell. But as the dust rose again and the region spiraled into fury, one thing became clear. This wasn't just revenge, it was reckoning, and Red Hollow would never be the same again. Red Hollow had always lived under a quiet kind of fear, the sort that settled into people's bones so deeply they stopped noticing it. But now, that fear had a voice, and it was louder than anyone could ignore. The second coffin changed everything. Caleb Rourke stood in the center of the storm he once controlled, watching as his own men turned uncertain, their loyalty cracking under the weight of something they didn't understand. "Find her!" someone shouted, but the command didn't carry the authority it once would have. Alara Vance was no longer just a stranger with a warning. She had become something far more dangerous. A symbol. And symbols were harder to kill than people. As the dust swirled across the square, Caleb realized something he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer the only force shaping this town. Alara moved through the outskirts of Red Hollow like a ghost, unseen but always present. She knew they were hunting her now, but that had always been part of the plan. Fear had to spread. Truth had to follow it. At an abandoned barn just beyond the ridge, she paused, catching her breath. Inside, Hidden beneath broken boards and old hay were the pieces she had prepared long before arriving. Documents, names, evidence, not just of Caleb's crimes, but of the entire network that had protected him. Ranchers, officials, even the sheriff. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was exposure. 3 coffins, she whispered to herself. But not just for the dead, for the lies too. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to come. Back in town, Sheriff Dalton faced a choice he had avoided for years. He stood alone in his office, staring at the badge pinned to his chest as if seeing it for the first time. For too long, he had looked the other way, convincing himself it was survival. But now, survival was no longer enough. The deaths, the warning, the truth clawing its way to the surface. It all pointed to something inevitable. When he finally stepped outside, his decision was made. The town needed law again, real law. And if that meant standing against Caleb Rourke, then so be it. The question was no longer whether Red Hollow would change, but who would survive when it did. The region erupted by morning. Riders carried news faster than the wind. 2 men dead, a rancher challenged, a town on the edge of collapse. Neighboring settlements began to take notice, and with attention came pressure. Caleb Rourke had built his power quietly, but now it was being dragged into the light, and the light was unforgiving. Standing on the balcony of his ranch house, Caleb looked out over the land he had claimed as his own. For years, it had obeyed him without question. Now, it felt different, restless. "It's just one woman," one of his men said, trying to steady the moment. But Caleb knew better. "No," he replied slowly. "It's never just one." Alara didn't run. That was what confused them the most. Instead, she returned to the town square, to the very place where everything had begun. By the time she arrived, people were already gathering, drawn by rumors, by fear, by curiosity they couldn't resist. Sheriff Dalton stood waiting, his hand resting near his holster, not as a threat, but as a promise. "If you've got something to say," he told her, "now's the time." Alara looked around at the faces watching her. People who had suffered. People who had stayed silent. People who had chosen safety over truth. Slowly, she pulled out the folded papers. "You all deserve to know," she said. And just like that, the silence returned. Heavy, expectant, dangerous. She began reading names. Not just Caleb's, not just the dead, but everyone involved, every deal, every cover-up, every life destroyed to protect power. Gasps spread through the crowd as familiar names surfaced. Men people trusted, men people feared. The foundation of Red Hollow began to crack in real time. And then, like a storm finally breaking, Caleb Rourke appeared. He stepped forward, his presence still commanding, but no longer unquestioned. "That's enough," he said. But for the first time, no one moved to stop her. No one stepped forward to defend him. And in that moment, something irreversible happened. The town stopped belonging to him. The confrontation that followed wasn't loud, but it was final. Caleb and Alara stood facing each other in the center of everything that had been hidden for so long. "You think this ends with me?" Caleb asked, his voice steady but strained. "You think tearing me down fixes anything?" Alara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around at the people watching, the same people who had once been too afraid to speak. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't fix it, but it stops it." The wind picked up again, carrying dust between them like a curtain about to fall. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, breaking the tension. "Caleb Rourke," he said, louder than he had ever spoken before, "you're under arrest." The words felt strange in the air, almost unreal. For a second, it seemed like time itself had paused. Then Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think a badge changes anything?" he said. But even as he spoke, he could see it. The shift in every face around him. The fear was gone, or at least, it wasn't stronger than the truth anymore. And that was something he couldn't control. The third coffin wasn't filled that day, but it was prepared. Not for death, but for the end of something far bigger. Caleb Rourke was taken away under the same sky he once ruled beneath, his empire collapsing not with violence, but with exposure. Alara stood silently as it happened, her mission complete, but her expression unreadable. This was never about victory. It was about balance. And as the people of Red Hollow slowly began to reclaim what had been taken from them, one truth remained clear. Some storms don't destroy everything. They reveal what was worth saving all along.